A flight of discovery. Captain Suzan Chen gripped the controls of the small Cessna aircraft as it bounced through another patch of turbulence. She glanced at her copilot, Jack, who was studying the navigation instruments with a furrowed brow. "How's it looking?" Suzan asked, raising her voice to be heard over the drone of the engines. Jack shook his head. "Not great. The storm came out of nowhere. We're way off course and visibility is near zero. I can't get a fix on our position." Suzan's jaw tightened as she peered out the windshield. All she could see was a wall of gray clouds and sheets of rain. They had been on a routine cargo run from Hawaii to Fiji when the tropical storm had blown in unexpectedly, knocking out their navigation systems and tossing the small plane around like a toy. "We need to find somewhere to set down before we run out of fuel," Suzan said. "Keep your eyes peeled for any break in the clouds." For the next hour, they flew on through the tempest. Suzan's arms were aching from fighting the controls. Just as she was starting to lose hope, she spotted a faint glow through the murk ahead. "Look, I think I see something," she called to Jack. As they drew closer, the clouds began to thin. Suddenly, they burst out of the storm into clear air. Suzan gasped at the sight before them. A lush tropical island stretched out below, ringed by white sand beaches and vibrant coral reefs. At the center of the island rose a towering mountain wreathed in mist. But what truly caught Suzan's attention was the shimmering, translucent dome that seemed to envelop the entire landmass. "What the hell?" Jack muttered. "That's not on any of our charts." Suzan circled the island, searching for a place to land. As they flew over the treetops, she spotted clearings and what looked like ancient stone structures peeking out from the jungle canopy. There were no signs of modern civilization, no roads, no buildings, no boats in the lagoon. "This is impossible," Suzan said. "How could an entire island go undetected?" A warning light began flashing on the control panel. "Fuel's almost gone," Jack reported. "We need to set down now." Suzan nodded grimly and banked towards a long stretch of beach on the eastern side of the island. She eased back on the throttle and extended the landing gear. "Here goes nothing," she muttered. The wheels touched down on the packed sand with a jolt. Suzan let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding as she brought the plane to a stop near the tree line. For a moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engines. "Well," Jack said finally, "I guess we'd better go see where the hell we've landed." They climbed out of the cockpit, stretching their stiff limbs. The air was warm and heavy with humidity. A salty breeze rustled the palm fronds overhead. Suzan breathed deeply, taking in the earthy scent of the jungle. "Hello," she called out. "Is anyone there?" Her voice echoed across the empty beach. There was no response. "I don't like this," Jack said, eyeing the dense foliage warily. "Something's not right. We should stay with the plane until help arrives." Suzan shook her head. "We're off all known flight paths. Could be days before anyone finds us. We need to explore, try to find fresh water and food." Reluctantly, Jack agreed. They gathered some basic supplies from the plane and set off down the beach. As they walked, Suzan studied the shimmering dome overhead. It seemed to pulse faintly, like a living thing. "What do you think that is?" she asked. Jack shrugged. "Some kind of atmospheric anomaly, maybe? Or a mass hallucination from hitting our heads during the landing." Suzan chuckled. "Well, if we're hallucinating, at least it's a nice tropical paradise and not a barren wasteland." They had gone about a mile when Suzan spotted something half buried in the sand. She knelt down and brushed away the grains, revealing a small metal disc covered in strange symbols. "Look at this," she said, holding it up for Jack to see. "It's not corroded at all, like it was just dropped here recently." Jack frowned. "Those markings? They don't look like any language I've ever seen." A twig snapped in the jungle behind them. Suzan whirled around, her heart pounding. For a moment, she thought she glimpsed a figure watching them from the shadows. Then it was gone. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Jack nodded, his face pale. "I think it's time we headed back to the plane." But as they turned to retrace their steps, Suzan realized with growing horror that the beach behind them was empty. There was no sign of their aircraft or their footprints in the sand. Impossible, she breathed. A low humming filled the air. The dome above them pulsed brightly. Suzan felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. The world seemed to shimmer and distort. When her vision cleared, they were no longer standing on the beach. Instead, they found themselves in a vast stone chamber lit by flickering torches. Ornate carvings covered the walls, depicting scenes of strange rituals and fantastical creatures. A group of people stood before them, dressed in flowing robes embroidered with the same symbols from the metal disc. Their skin was a deep bronze, their eyes an unnatural shade of violet. One of them, a tall woman with elaborate braids, stepped forward. "Welcome, travelers," she said in oddly accented English. "We have been expecting you." Suzan gaped at her. "Who are you? Where are we?" The woman smiled enigmatically. "I am Zara, High Priestess of Avalon. You stand in the heart of our hidden kingdom, in the place where reality bends to our will." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane. What's going on here?" "All will be explained in time," Zara replied. "For now, know that you have been brought here for a purpose. The fate of our world, and yours, hangs in the balance." She gestured to her companions. "Come. There is much to show you." Suzan hesitated, glancing at Jack. His face mirrored her own uncertainty and fear. But what choice did they have? With a deep breath, Suzan stepped forward to follow their strange hosts deeper into the hidden world of Avalon. As they walked through torchlit corridors, Zara explained the history of her people. They were the last descendants of an ancient and advanced civilization that had once spanned the globe. When catastrophe threatened to destroy them thousands of years ago, they used their mastery of science and mysticism to create this hidden sanctuary. "The dome you saw is a barrier between dimensions," Zara said. "It allows us to exist outside of normal space and time, safe from the ravages of the outside world." They emerged into a vast circular chamber. At its center stood a pillar of swirling energy contained within a crystal sphere. Suzan gasped at the sight. "This is the Nexus," Zara intoned. "The source of our power and the anchor that holds our realm in place." She turned to face Suzan and Jack, her expression grave. "But the Nexus is failing. The barriers between worlds grow thin. If nothing is done, Avalon will collapse, unleashing chaos across all realities." "What does this have to do with us?" Suzan asked. "You were brought here by the will of the Nexus itself," Zara replied. "Only those from the outside world can help restore the balance and save us all." Jack scoffed. "You expect us to believe all this? That we were magically transported to some interdimensional island to save the world?" One of the other robed figures stepped forward, an elderly man with a long white beard. "Perhaps a demonstration is in order," he said. He raised his hands and muttered words in an unknown language. The air around them shimmered. Suddenly, they were standing on the beach again beside their plane. Suzan blinked in shock. "How?" The old man smiled. "Reality here is flexible. With the power of the Nexus, we can reshape the world around us. But that power is fading." To prove his point, he waved his hand again. The plane vanished, replaced by a grove of fruit trees. Another gesture, and they were back in the stone chamber. "Okay," Suzan said slowly. "Let's say we believe you. What exactly do you need us to do?" Zara led them to a side chamber where an ornate pedestal stood. Atop it sat a gleaming metal sphere covered in the same strange symbols they had seen before. "This is the key of worlds," she explained. "An artifact of our ancestors that can stabilize the Nexus. But it will only function for those not native to Avalon. You must take it to the heart of the island and unite it with the Nexus." "That doesn't sound too difficult," Jack said warily. The old man chuckled. "The path will not be easy. The instability of the Nexus has allowed dark forces to seep into our realm. You will face many dangers and trials along the way." Suzan squared her shoulders. "We'll do it. We don't have much choice, do we? If your world falls, ours is at risk too." Zara nodded solemnly. Thank you. The fate of all realities rests in your hands now. After a brief rest and meal, Suzan and Jack set out on their quest. They carried packs of supplies and the key of worlds, which pulsed with an inner light. Zara and the other Avalonians bid them farewell at the edge of the city. Remember, Zara cautioned, things here are not always as they appear. Trust your instincts and each other. May the wisdom of the ancients guide you. The first part of their journey took them through lush jungle. Colorful birds called from the canopy and iridescent insects flitted between giant flowers. But Suzan remained on guard, knowing that danger could lurk behind any tree. Her caution proved warranted when they entered a meadow filled with beautiful crystalline flowers. As Jack reached out to touch one, Suzan noticed the plants quivering. "Wait!" she cried, pulling him back just as the flower snapped shut with razor-sharp petals. All around them, the crystals began to move, uprooting themselves to reveal spindly legs. Soon they were surrounded by a swarm of the creatures, their faceted bodies gleaming wickedly. "Run!" Suzan yelled. They sprinted across the meadow, dodging the snapping jaws of the crystal monsters. Jack yelped as one caught his sleeve, tearing the fabric. They didn't stop until they were safely back in the dense jungle, gasping for breath. "Okay," Jack panted. "I'm officially convinced this place is insane." Suzan nodded grimly. "We need to be more careful. Who knows what other dangers are out there?" They pressed on, picking their way through the undergrowth. The jungle gradually thinned, giving way to a landscape of twisted rock formations. Mist swirled around the stone pillars, playing tricks with the light. As they navigated the maze-like terrain, Suzan began to hear whispers on the wind. Faint voices calling her name, pleading for help. She tried to ignore them, but they grew more insistent. "Do you hear that?" she asked Jack. He shook his head. "Hear what? It's dead quiet out here." The voices grew louder. Suzan thought she recognized one. Her mother, who had died years ago. "Suzan, honey, please help me," it called. "I'm trapped. This way, quickly." Without thinking, Suzan turned and ran towards the voice. She heard Jack shouting behind her, but she didn't stop. She had to reach her mother. The mists thickened around her until she could barely see. The ground beneath her feet grew soft and unstable. Too late, she realized she had run straight into a pit of quicksand. Suzan thrashed in panic as she sank deeper. The voices laughed mockingly, no longer sounding like her mother. Shapes moved in the mist, twisted, inhuman things. "Suzan!" Jack's voice cut through the haze. She saw him appear at the edge of the pit, reaching out to her. "Grab my hand." With a supreme effort, Suzan lunged and caught Jack's outstretched arm. He strained to pull her free as the sand sucked at her body. Finally, she tumbled onto solid ground, gasping and trembling. Jack held her as the adrenaline faded. "What happened? You just took off running." Suzan shook her head. "I heard voices. I thought I heard my mother. It seemed so real." "This place is messing with our heads," Jack said grimly. "We can't trust anything we see or hear." They rested for a while as Suzan recovered her strength. As the sun began to set, they made camp in the shelter of a rock overhang. Jack gathered wood for a fire while Suzan laid out their bedrolls. In the deepening gloom, shadows danced at the edge of the firelight. Suzan kept imagining she saw figures moving just out of sight. She huddled closer to the flames. "Maybe we should take turns keeping watch," she suggested. Jack nodded in agreement. "Good idea. I'll take first shift. Try to get some sleep." But sleep proved elusive. Suzan tossed and turned, plagued by unsettling dreams. She saw visions of realities colliding, worlds torn apart by cosmic forces. In the dream, she stood before the Nexus as it pulsed erratically, feeling the fabric of existence unraveling around her. She jerked awake with a gasp. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows. Jack was nowhere to be seen. "Jack!" Suzan called, fear tightening her chest. There was no response. She scrambled to her feet, looking around wildly. In the pre-dawn light, she spotted footprints leading away from their camp. Without hesitation, she grabbed her pack and the key of worlds, then set off following the trail. The tracks led her to the base of a sheer cliff face. There she found one of Jack's boots lying in the dust. Looking up, she saw a narrow path zigzagging up the rock wall. Suzan took a deep breath and began to climb. The path was treacherous, barely wide enough in places for her to edge along sideways. Loose stones skittered away under her feet, bouncing down the cliff face. She tried not to think about how far she would fall if she slipped. Near the top, the path ended at a small cave mouth. Suzan peered into the gloom, seeing nothing but blackness beyond. "Jack," she called. Her voice echoed back at her. Steeling herself, Suzan entered the cave. She fumbled for the flashlight in her pack, clicking it on. The beam illuminated rough stone walls that glistened with moisture. She ventured deeper, the darkness pressing in around her. The passage twisted and turned. Suzan lost all sense of direction as she wandered through the labyrinth. Just as she was considering turning back, she emerged into a vast cavern. Her flashlight beam couldn't reach the distant walls or ceiling, but it did reveal Jack, lying unconscious on a stone platform in the center of the chamber. Suzan rushed to his side. "Jack! Jack! Wake up!" She shook him gently. His eyes fluttered open. "Suzan? Where are we?" Before she could answer, a deep voice rumbled through the cavern. "Welcome, seekers." Suzan whirled around. A massive shape moved in the darkness, something ancient and powerful. She raised her flashlight, revealing a creature out of legend. It had the body of a lion, massive feathered wings, and the head of a woman. The Sphinx regarded them with eyes that glowed like molten gold. "You have done well to reach this place," the Sphinx said. "But to proceed further, you must pass my test. Answer my riddle correctly, and the path forward will open. Fail, and you will never leave this cavern." Suzan swallowed hard. She helped Jack to his feet as the Sphinx settled onto its haunches before them. "We're ready," Suzan said, hoping she sounded more confident than she felt. The Sphinx nodded gravely. "Very well. Here is your riddle. I have cities but no houses. I have mountains but no trees. I have water but no fish. What am I?" Suzan's mind raced. She glanced at Jack, who looked equally puzzled. The Sphinx watched them impassively, waiting for their answer. "Take your time," the creature said, "but know that you have only one chance to answer correctly." Suzan closed her eyes, trying to focus. Cities without houses, mountains without trees, water without fish. What could have all those things but not the things normally associated with them? Suddenly, it clicked. Her eyes flew open. "A map!" she exclaimed. "The answer is a map." For a long moment, the Sphinx was silent. Then it inclined its head. "You have answered wisely. The path is open to you." With a rumbling sound, a section of the cavern wall slid away, revealing a new passage bathed in soft light. "Thank you," Suzan said to the Sphinx, but the creature was already fading away into the darkness. She turned to Jack. "Are you okay? What happened to you?" He shook his head, looking dazed. "I'm not sure. I thought I heard something while on watch. When I went to investigate, everything went black. Next thing I knew, I woke up here." "Well, I'm just glad you're all right," Suzan said. "Come on. Let's see where this tunnel leads." They entered the new passage, which sloped gently upward. The walls were smooth and seemed to glow with a faint inner light. After walking for what felt like hours, they emerged into bright sunlight. Suzan gasped at the sight before them. They stood on a narrow ledge halfway up the mist-shrouded mountain they had seen from the air. Below, the island spread out in a riot of green, ringed by sparkling blue waters. The dome arched overhead, its surface rippling like disturbed water. "Look," Jack said, pointing. A stone staircase had been cut into the mountainside, leading up towards the peak. They began to climb, their legs burning with the effort. The air grew thinner as they ascended, making it hard to catch their breath. Finally, they reached a plateau near the summit. At its center stood an ancient temple, its weathered stones covered in vines. The same strange symbols they had seen before were carved above the entrance. "This must be it," Suzan said. "The heart of the island." They entered the temple cautiously. The interior was a single large chamber, empty except for a raised dais at the far end. Atop it floated a swirling vortex of energy, a miniature version of the Nexus they had seen in the Avalonian city. As they approached, the key of worlds began to pulse and hum in Suzan's pack. She took it out, feeling it vibrate in her hands. "I guess this is where we're supposed to use it," she said. But before they could reach the dais, the temple began to shake. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. A deep, menacing laugh echoed through the chamber. "Fools!" a voice boomed. "Did you really think it would be so easy?" The air shimmered, and a figure materialized before them. It was a man, or something that looked like a man dressed in ornate black robes. His eyes glowed with an unnatural red light. "Who are you?" Suzan demanded. The man smiled coldly. "I am Maloch, rightful ruler of Avalon, and you will give me the key." Jack stepped protectively in front of Suzan. "Not a chance, pal." Maloch laughed again. "You have no idea of the forces you're dealing with, outsiders. The Avalonians have grown weak, afraid to use the true power at their disposal. With the key, I will reshape reality itself." He raised his hands, and bolts of crackling energy shot towards them. Suzan and Jack dove in opposite directions, the blast scorching the stone where they had been standing. "Run!" Jack yelled. "I'll distract him." He charged at Maloch, tackling the robed figure. They grappled, energy sparking around them. Suzan sprinted for the dais, clutching the key of worlds. Just as she reached it, a blast of power sent Jack flying across the room. He hit the wall with a sickening thud and crumpled to the ground. "Jack!" Suzan cried. Maloch advanced on her, his hands wreathed in dark energy. "Give me the key, girl, or your friend dies." Suzan looked from Jack's still form to the pulsing vortex of the Nexus. Time seemed to slow down as she weighed her options. With a defiant glare at Maloch, she raised the key high. "Neither of us will have it." She hurled the sphere into the swirling energy of the Nexus. There was a blinding flash and a sound like reality tearing apart. Suzan was thrown backwards by the shockwave. When her vision cleared, she saw the Nexus had expanded to fill the entire chamber. Ribbons of energy writhed and pulsed, reshaping the world around them. Maloch howled in rage as he was caught in the maelstrom, his body twisting and dissolving. Suzan crawled to Jack's side, shielding him with her body as best she could. The temple crumbled around them, stones turning to dust and blowing away. She squeezed her eyes shut, clinging to Jack as she felt the fabric of reality unraveling. Then, as suddenly as it began, everything went still and quiet. Suzan cautiously opened her eyes. They were lying on the beach where they had first landed. The jungle behind them looked normal, with no sign of ancient temples or mysterious domes. Their plane sat nearby, apparently undamaged. Jack groaned and stirred beside her. "Suzan? What happened?" She helped him sit up, looking around in wonder. "I'm not sure. I think we reset things somehow. Restored the balance." A glint in the sand caught her eye. She reached down and picked up a small metal disc covered in strange symbols, the same one she had found when they first arrived. As she held it, knowledge flooded her mind. She understood now what had happened, the true nature of Avalon and the Nexus. This disc was a key of its own, a record of the island's history and a warning to future generations. "It's over," she said softly. "Avalon is safe, hidden once more between the folds of reality, and our world is protected from the chaos that threatened to spill over." Jack shook his head, looking dazed. "So all of that really happened? It wasn't just some crazy shared hallucination?" Suzan smiled and helped him to his feet. "Oh, it happened all right, but I have a feeling no one will believe us if we tell them." As if to prove her point, she heard the sound of a helicopter approaching. A Coast Guard rescue team had finally found them, no doubt responding to their distress signals from before they encountered the storm. "Come on," Suzan said. "Let's go home. I don't know about you, but I've had enough adventure for a while." As they waved to the approaching helicopter, Suzan tucked the metal disc into her pocket. She had a feeling their journey wasn't truly over, that someday Avalon might need them again. But for now, she was content to return to the familiar reality of their own world. The helicopter landed on the beach, kicking up a cloud of sand. As the rescue team rushed towards them, Suzan took one last look at the island behind them. For just a moment, she thought she saw the faint shimmer of a dome in the air. Then it was gone, and Avalon faded once more into legend. Epilogue. In the months that followed their return, Suzan and Jack tried to readjust to normal life. They told the authorities a simplified version of events, claiming they had been forced to land on an uncharted island due to the storm. Extensive searches of the area found no trace of the mysterious land they described. Suzan kept the metal disc hidden away, studying its symbols in secret. Sometimes at night, she dreamed of Avalon, of shimmering domes and ancient magic, of realities intersecting in impossible ways. She knew that somewhere out there, beyond the veil of ordinary perception, Zara and her people were watching over the delicate balance between worlds. Jack eventually convinced her to partner with him in starting their own small charter plane business. They specialized in flights to remote Pacific islands, always keeping an eye out for any sign of the hidden realm they had visited. And sometimes, when the weather was just right and the light hit the waves a certain way, Suzan thought she caught glimpses of something extraordinary. A flash of a crystal spire, the shadow of a sphinx's wings, the echo of a voice from another world. In those moments, she smiled to herself, knowing that reality held far more wonders and mysteries than most people ever realized. She kept the disc close always, a reminder of their incredible journey and a key to a world beyond imagination. Suzan knew that one day, Avalon might call upon them again. And when it did, she would be ready for another flight of discovery into the unknown. The years passed, and Suzan and Jack's charter business flourished. They became known for their skill at navigating the treacherous waters of the South Pacific, often taking scientists and explorers to remote atolls and uninhabited islands. But no matter how many uncharted places they visited, none compared to the wonder and mystery of Avalon. Suzan never forgot her experiences on the hidden island. She kept the metal disc with her always, studying its intricate symbols in her spare time. Sometimes, she thought she could almost understand the strange language, as if the knowledge was there in her mind, just out of reach. It was on a routine flight, 5 years after their Avalon adventure, that things once again took a turn for the extraordinary. They were transporting a group of marine biologists to a research station when their instruments began to malfunction. "Suzan, are you seeing this?" Jack called from the cockpit. She leaned forward, frowning at the displays. The navigation system was going haywire, showing their position jumping erratically across the map. "It's just like before," she murmured. A shiver ran down her spine as she felt the metal disc grow warm in her pocket. She pulled it out, gasping as she saw it glowing with an inner light. Suddenly, the plane was enveloped in a thick bank of clouds. Lightning flashed around them, but instead of the usual white-blue, the bolts were a strange, shimmering purple. "Hang on!" Suzan shouted to their passengers. "We're experiencing some turbulence." The plane shuddered and bucked. For a heart-stopping moment, Suzan thought they might break apart. Then they burst out of the clouds into clear air. What they saw made Suzan's breath catch in her throat. Below them stretched a vast archipelago of islands, each one crowned with gleaming cities that seemed to be made of crystal and light. Sleek vessels that looked more like living creatures than ships skimmed across the waters between the islands. And arching over it all was the familiar iridescent dome, but far larger than Suzan remembered, encompassing what must have been hundreds of square miles of ocean. "My God!" Jack breathed. "Is that?" Suzan nodded, a mix of excitement and apprehension filling her. Avalon, but different, changed. As they circled, trying to make sense of what they were seeing, A voice crackled over their radio, a voice Suzan recognized instantly. Suzan Chen, Jack Hawkins. At last, you have returned to us. Please follow the guidance beacon to the landing platform. We have much to discuss. A beam of light shot up from one of the crystal cities, creating a glowing pathway in the air. With a shared look of determination, Suzan and Jack guided the plane towards it. As they descended, Suzan turned to address their bewildered passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the unexpected detour. I promise we'll explain everything soon. For now, please remain calm and seated. We're about to land in a place few outsiders have ever seen. The plane touched down smoothly on a platform that seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal. It pulsed gently beneath them, as if breathing. As they disembarked, Suzan saw a familiar figure waiting for them. Zara, the high priestess of Avalon, looked exactly as Suzan remembered her. But there was a new gravity to her expression, a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Welcome back, my friends," Zara said. "I wish we were meeting again under better circumstances." "What's happened?" Suzan asked. "Avalon seems bigger, more advanced than before." Zara nodded gravely. "Much has changed in the years since you restored the Nexus. Our civilization has grown and flourished. But with that growth has come new dangers." She gestured for them to follow her into the Crystal City. As they walked, Zara explained the situation. "The power of the Nexus has expanded far beyond what we ever dreamed possible. We can now manipulate reality on a scale our ancestors never imagined. But this power has attracted the attention of beings from other dimensions, entities that seek to harness the Nexus for their own ends. They entered a vast chamber dominated by a swirling vortex of energy that made the original Nexus look like a candle flame next to the sun. We are under siege," Zara continued. "These interdimensional beings assault our barriers constantly, seeking a way in. Our greatest minds and strongest warriors work tirelessly to hold them back. But we are losing ground." Suzan felt a chill run through her. "What can we do to help?" Zara turned to her with a sad smile. "You carry within you a piece of the original Nexus, a shard of pure creation that bonded with your life force when you cast the Key of Worlds into the vortex. It is that power which drew you back to us in our hour of need." She took Suzan's hands in her own. "We need you to undertake a perilous journey to the very edge of our reality. There, you must use your connection to the Nexus to seal the breaches between dimensions and drive back the invaders." Jack stepped forward. "You can count on us. We'll do whatever it takes to protect Avalon and our own world." Zara nodded gratefully. "Thank you, both of you. But know that this mission will be far more dangerous than anything you faced before. The very fabric of reality will be unstable. You may see things that defy comprehension, face horrors beyond imagination." Suzan squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of responsibility settling upon her. "We understand the risks. When do we leave?" "Immediately," Zara replied. "Every moment we delay, the enemy grows stronger. Come, we must prepare you for the journey." As they followed Zara deeper into the heart of the Crystal City, Suzan's mind raced with questions and possibilities. She knew that once again, she and Jack stood at the threshold of an adventure beyond anything they could have imagined. The fate of not just Avalon, but countless realities hung in the balance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever mind-bending wonders or terrifying dangers they might face, Suzan was ready. For in her heart, she knew that this was what she had been preparing for all along. A chance to once again take flight into the unknown and help shape the very nature of existence itself. With a deep breath and a determined set to her jaw, Suzan stepped forward into her destiny, ready to face whatever lay beyond the boundaries of reality.
Subscribe for more.